Hi, and thank you for joining me as we are going to embark on a very fast-paced overview of what's called the trans movement. However, I call it the trans deception. But this is a movement that is targeting the most vulnerable of kids among us. It's targeting families, and it's targeting churches, and it will target anyone or anything that will stand up for and try to protect kids. You know, some people might ask, do we really need to take this seriously? Is it all that big of a deal? I would say, in my estimation, there's probably nothing bigger right now that's facing families, facing vulnerable kids, that is targeting families and kids, and will start targeting churches here in the U.S. If we don't understand what's happening internationally, if we don't understand what's happening in Canada, as far as those of us here in the U.S., we stand to find out the hard way what they themselves are going through right now. There are a lot of implications for this movement, not the least of which is the supposed equal access or accessing private spaces of women and kids. And that's a heyday for sexual predators. Now, of course, those pushing this movement will say it's all about inclusion and diversity and tolerance and love is love, but they also say love has no age limit, love has no boundaries. When the reality is that legitimate adults want to help kids ensure that they're protected from any potential grooming by deviant adults who are clearly accessing porn, and that's the dirty little secret. By the way, remove porn from the trans movement, and it will die away back to the numbers that we were seeing in 2005. It didn't exist. Those are the numbers of 2005. Without porn, the trans deception wouldn't exist because kids are being groomed. So legitimate adults want to protect kids from those that would use this kind of opportunity to embed themselves in any movement, just like they do churches, by the way. A church is not a movement. Predators will take advantage of any opportunity. But the greatest pool that I know of in this day and age of vulnerable kids are within the trans movement. These are kids that have been sexually abused. These are kids that are autistic. These are kids that have been groomed. They have blurred boundaries and they have a hard time with their intuition. They make ideal targets. So predators are embedding themselves within this movement. What does that mean? Every single adult in this movement are predators? Absolutely not. But predators are having a wonderful heyday in this movement, accessing kids, and protective, legitimate adults need to be aware of it because predators will use any means necessary and any means at their disposal to attract kids. And the trans movement offers the perfect opportunity for sophisticated predators to utilize the best of time-tested cult techniques of targeting, of recruitment, and retention, like you will find in some of the more notorious cults, such as the sex cult NXIVM and Scientology. And the one thing about a cult is once it has you, once it's lured you in, it doesn't really let you go very easily. Not without a fight.
Lollipops and all free today. Cherry pies, cream puffs, ice cream, treacle tarts.
Treacle tarts and ice cream and all free.
Come along, Kitty Winky. Come along, my little dears, my little mice. Come to me. What will it be? Ice cream?
Yes, ice cream!
Strawberry,
Please,
chocolate,
chocolate,
it's all inside.
Oh,
Come along, my little dears. Go inside, not a penny space. Go inside, my little dears.
Last thing I remember, I was running for the door. Such a lovely place, such a lovely face.
So what is the trans movement? Well, in a nutshell, it's a phenomenon that's sweeping the Western world based upon the premise that kids can be born in the wrong body. There are fraudulent groups, organizations, and deceivers who suggest that administering cross-sex hormones can help facilitate a child changing into the opposite sex. That's a grand deception, and it's only gaining momentum. What I can assure you is that, clinically speaking, this phenomenon didn't exist prior to the year 2005. There are exceptions, there have been throughout human history, but never was there anything like this seen by myself, my colleagues, people I knew working with very difficult cases with kids in the system. This didn't exist. What is it? Where did it come from? So, what is the trans movement? Well, I can assure you it's not a fad because fads come and go and fads kind of trend upward. This does not trend upward. This has been a tidal wave. This is a tsunami. So what is the trans movement? The trans movement is the largest man-made psychological lie, scam, scheme, and deception ever foisted upon vulnerable, gender-confused young people and their families, ever devised, ever concocted to strategically use kids and teens who have untreated or improperly treated mental health issues. And that's key. So that they can be manipulated toward a strategically desired outcome to take them for all they're worth, to use them for the benefit of financial and sexual predators, to move them and the culture toward a desired outcome by adeptly employing the best of time-tested cultic brainwashing techniques.
Oh, nothing at all. Trust in me, just in me. Little America, rest in peace.
The Australian Psychological Association, that represents psychologists, it has now written to the Tasmanian Law Reform Institute saying, and get this, doctors should be able to perform irreversible surgery on children under 18 to change their gender, even when the child's parents say no. Now, the association says that as long as a doctor thinks that a child can make that decision for themselves, they can get that surgery. And what's more, that association says, well, don't worry about giving the child mandatory counselling before the surgery, scrap it. It's just an unnecessary burden.
What's happening is I took testosterone on and off because I was so dysfunctional, but I took testosterone for a few years and I had 2 botched surgeries on my chest, and immediately after the second one, the denial that I had been in for the last few years just fell apart, and I was faced with the fact that I was living a lie and that I just couldn't do it anymore. But at that point, nobody was talking about detransition, and I was alone with this problem, and I just started using drugs and ran away from everyone that I knew.
Well, Professor Diana Kenny is a developmental psychologist, and she deals with many parents whose children have declared themselves transgender, born in the wrong body, so it's said. Professor Kenny joins me now. Great to see you. Thank you so much for your time. Can you tell me, Professor, what you make of this recommendation that doctors should be able to perform this gender-changing surgery even without the parents' permission?
Well, obviously I'm dismayed and disappointed that the peak body for Australian psychologists could make such an ill-considered statement that would result in quite young children, often very immature, often with psychological disturbance, making such decisions for themselves without proper oversight. It's very disturbing.
I don't know if it was actual dysphoria. Some of it, maybe it was. I still kind of feel it sometimes, but a lot of what drove me to transition in the first place was linked to a lot of mental health issues and a lot of stuff that I had going on that really should have been taken care of beforehand, but it was not for a variety of reasons.
Can we ever really say, as the association seems to suggest, that a child under 16 is capable of making a decision like this, can be mature enough?
I was younger, especially when I was a teenager, 16, 17 years old, I struggled a lot with depression. And I won't lie, at certain points in my life, and I'm not going to go into detail, but at certain points of my life, I was suicidal. Because circumstances, like I said, I won't get into it, but certain points got really rough, and I hit some major lows, and sometimes it got really, really hard to see around the corners and picture the next day,
Look, 16-year-olds vary vastly with respect to their maturity and their intelligence and their capacity to analyse very complex situations. But what we do know about this subpopulation of young people with gender dysphoria is that many of them, actually almost a majority of them, have other mental health issues.
I soon ended up going to a children's mental hospital in my state because I was so depressed that I wasn't going to school and my parents didn't know what to do. So they sent me to the mental hospital for about 10 days and that didn't help. I think I was at the point where it actually kind of made it worse. And I started, pretty soon after that, when I came back, I was still cutting myself and still depressed. It didn't do anything. I still wasn't going to school.
And many come, with a background of serious psychological issues, such as being on the autism spectrum disorder.
There are so many overlapping or interlacing conditions that can be confused for gender, like for a need to transition, or can cause dysphoria, and going through the massive list that nobody ever really went over with me as a kid.
Suffering quite severe depression, anxiety, social isolation, marginalisation, and so on. And they're struggling very hard to deal with these underlying issues.
Something I did as a reaction to what was going on around me, with my toxic relationship. I hate using that word, but that's really what it was. And like my really difficult home life and my struggles with school and my struggles with severe anxiety and depression and, autism, blah, blah, blah. The list goes fucking on and on. And it was just like the only way that I could express what was going on inside of me.
And then to be given the freedom to make decisions about irreversible, life-changing surgery that could seriously impact the quality of their life from that point onwards.
Now, most insurances that cover top surgery require some kind of official letter from one or multiple therapists or like gender therapists or doctors or medical professionals stating that you are a person that experiences gender dysphoria to the extent that surgery is necessary. I got really lucky, and the therapist that I found only required one therapy session in order for her to be comfortable writing this letter for me.
Diagnosed when you were younger, like by an actual clinician, or how did you come to accept that you were transgender in your mind?
Well, as a child, I never got diagnosed by any clinic, and not until I went out on my own at age 18, 19 when I did it on my own. The clinic that I had gone to around 18, 19, well, 18 is when I started to go. The therapist that I got, she actually told me that she could get me all the paperwork that I needed to transition that after my first session with her.
So are you suggesting that they've got other things going on in their lives? They think their problem is that they're born in the wrong body, so to speak, and surgery will fix it, when in fact they've got these other things that surgery will not touch?
Absolutely.
Oh, I felt all my life like I had this terrible, painful gender dysphoria that basically just debilitated me, and I wasn't able to function because the depression was so bad. It's just that, I spent a lot of years, because of trauma, super dissociative. My dissociations were different it wasn't like I became these other people, but I do have these other people in my head. Actually, part of what led me to transition is a bunch of these personalities are male. These facets of my personality are male or male presenting. And that sort of made me feel like, well, I'm everything, you know, like I'm not just a woman, I'm a man too. Almost like this non-binary type thing.
And to say that these young people can make the decision for themselves and declaring counselling or psychotherapy or even consultation or discussions with parents irrelevant or an unnecessary burden just defies belief.
You can see the correlation, right? I got really depressed as my dysphoria got worse. You know, I started testosterone and my self-harm got worse. Like, all of these steps I was taking towards transitioning were actually, I felt like they were making me better. Like, in the short term, these little things would make me euphoric. But in the long term, it was just getting worse.
Well, the Australian Psychological Society fails to discriminate subgroups of children and adolescents with gender dysphoria. And what we're mainly dealing with at the moment is a relatively new presentation called Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoria. And it's had an incredible increase in the last 5 to 10 years, and in particular young female adolescents who had never shown any sign of gender dysphoria in early childhood, suddenly declaring themselves transgender.
Experienced, and I still do experience dysphoria. All that's really changed is how I choose to label it. And a lot of my trans identity was connected with hating myself and seeing transition as this escape, this way out of my past and this way out of my body and this way out of just everything that I couldn't deal with on a day-to-day basis.
The fact that the Australian Psychological Society submission and other statements that they've made recently fail to acknowledge this new subgroup of gender dysphoria serves to really muddy the waters about what are the underlying psychological issues affecting this subgroup of young people.
The fact that I was so obsessed with hormones, like I couldn't talk about anything else. This should have been some sort of red flag to someone somewhere. Like, I literally, the only thing I thought about was getting on hormones and like transitioning. That was it. Like, that was it. Like, you couldn't have a conversation with me about something else. I don't want to be like that anymore. Like, there's definitely a problem with like the way my brain like looks at things, but it's called my personality. So like, that's it. Like, there's nothing else. I don't know. Like, how did that not raise questions for people? Like my parents, like, this is a problem, not something that should be like given into. But I've kind of always gotten what I want. So like,
and in fact, the children that I've been treating, and the adolescents in particular, I view this rapid onset gender dysphoria as a problem of core identity.
And I would say that my whole life, probably just because I'm quite a sensitive person and because I'm a girl and we're taught to fixate on how we look, I would have a predisposition to getting body dysmorphia.
It's not a problem of gender identity. It's an issue where the young person is struggling to find their core identity. It is a psychological issue and not an issue that can be repaired or corrected with cross-sex hormones and mutilating surgery.
Nobody in the medical or psychological field ever tried to dissuade me to offer other options, to really do anything to stop me besides tell me I should wait until I was 18. This is what Serrano was talking about when they discussed the medical system and how it shouldn't be gatekept.
I want to ask you, how many other medical conditions are there where you can walk into the doctor's office, tell them you have a certain condition which has no objective test, which can be caused by trauma or mental health issues or societal factors, and just receive life-altering medications on your say-so? Does that sound like gatekeeping?
Jump to the conclusion that these young people are transgender and that mutilating surgery that's irreversible is going to resolve all of the issues that are current in that young person's life.
I wanted to find ways of dealing with my gender issues that aren't medically transitioning, and those ways weren't presented to me. The only solution that was presented was chopping your breasts off, injecting yourself with hormones, and becoming a man.
I think it's criminal. I really do. I think we are on the forefront of seeing something that people will read in history and go, how in the fuck did that happen? I think there's going to be people that are going to be thrown in jail soon.
New Health Gender Affirmation Surgery Program is one of the few in the Midwest, having treated roughly 200 patients in just 2 years.
I think that we're going to discover some pretty nasty things, some nasty marketing that we're doing to children. For the first time in history, a marginalized group has a dollar sign attached to it.
The founder of the program says 20,000 people identify as transgender in Indiana.
It's because there's a dollar sign attached to it. It's the fact that, Lupron makes $24,000 a year for every child that gets on hormone blockers.
Right now, we get between 70 and 90 referrals a month.
So if we take a study that was done in a very small area of the UK that had 97 kids, and we fast forward several years, and that 97 goes to over 4,000, we're talking about $2 million worth of revenue to over $100 million in revenue. Now multiply that by the world. This is $1 billion industry.
Without insurance, it would have run, I think, around $100,000. That's what they all billed. But I think there's something weird with, if you're not on insurance, then they'll bill you slightly less, but because they know you're on insurance, they bill you more, something like that. I'm not really sure how that works. Basically, insurance seems like it really came in and saved my butt from having to pay $100K in medical bills, because that is utterly ridiculous.
And we're going to have a suicide epidemic that this world has never seen. And the people that are pushing medical transition, like the Susie Greens, the Mermaids, the Luprons, the Dr. Cranes, all these people that are monetizing things, it has nothing to do with love. It has to do with they have a dollar sign on their head. And that is a really sad place to be in society, because if we get to the point where we throw kids under the bus for money, we might as well just, come out of our houses and live with animals.
That's the same incidence as type 1 diabetes, so this is perhaps a much more common condition than we ever thought before.
I mean, in 2015, it was worth 9.9 something billion dollars, the LGBT market. Now it's worth $3.6 trillion in 5 years. I mean, that's wild.
So, in a nutshell, this is the ultimate man-made psychological scheme. It's the modern equivalent of snake oil. It's the true conversion therapy. And also, it involves some very mentally disturbed mothers in terms of the younger kids that are being transitioned, mothers that have significant mental illness, quite frankly, or personality disorders. It's the perfect means by which agenda-driven predators and their apologists and white-collar psychopaths can perpetrate under the cloak of care and compassion while making a tremendous amount of money off of slicing and dicing these young people. But again, good professionals all around the world are starting to raise serious questions about what they've seen in terms of unethical professionals taking advantage of kids that are gender confused and have serious untreated mental health issues.
A record number of young people are being referred to the Children's Gender Service at the Tavistock. There were just 77 patients referred here 10 years ago. By last year, the number had climbed to 2,590 children, the majority female at birth. And they've told us Around 3,000 more children are on the waiting list. The clinic sees children under 18, some as young as 3 years old. Around half the children who come here are put on drugs at puberty to essentially pause their physical development. That would be the first step of any medical intervention.
My name is Dr. Michael Laidlaw. I'm an endocrinologist in Rockland, California. Puberty blockers are powerful hormones. They act on a small gland in the brain called the pituitary, and this controls the sex organs. For example, these blockers stop this action. Once you stop it, there are various harms and problems that occur afterwards.
The next would be hormone treatment at 16 years old. And any surgical procedures would only happen after they turned 18. Sky News research suggests 35 psychologists have resigned from the Children's Gender Service in London in the last 3 years. We've managed to contact 20 of them. Only 6 would speak to us. All 6 said they were concerned about giving hormone treatment to children with gender dysphoria. All 6 felt they weren't able to properly explore underlying psychological factors.
Looking back, there are young people who I now wouldn't necessarily put on medication or sign off on medication.
This was the only clinician prepared to be interviewed. They asked us to change their voice.
I was once working with an executive that felt the gender dysphoria a young person was presenting with was really strong, really intense. So she decided to put the young person forward for the hormone blocking treatment after 2 appointments. Looking back, it was a young person with a history of trauma and direct trauma in terms of abuse. And also there were other things happening to them, and this was not really explored by the clinician.
These views were echoed by others who had worked at the clinic. Therapy is not an option in this service, one psychologist told us. We fear that we have had front row seats to a medical scandal, said another. The whistleblower says they saw many female-born patients with underlying issues, such as experiences of homophobia or even a history of abuse.
The numbers started growing from 2012 when we started seeing more females coming forward, and this has happened across the Western world.
And as a psychologist, did you ever feel that you could say to a parent, "I don't believe your child is trans"?
No, and this is one of the reasons why I decided to leave the service, because as a psychologist, I felt that if I ever spoke to a family like this, I would immediately be called transphobic.
But after 24 years working with the Tavistock, Dr. Bell, a former president of the British Psychoanalytic Society, has recently retired. And in his first television interview since then, he began by outlining his worries about the service.
The main concerns were issues to do with lack of consent. Many of the people who spoke to me did not think the children were able to consent to the treatment. Then there were concerns of children being inappropriately pushed through to transition, whereas they had a lot of complex problems. As a result, children have been very seriously damaged.
I was basically put on different kinds of medications from age 12. Like, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I was diagnosed with an eating disorder and depression and anxiety, like I already said. But none of the medications that I was put on ever really seemed to help me very much. I really just struggled, and especially with a bipolar medication that was really intense. They were having me put on antipsychotics from age 12. I took those for about 2 years. So I took most of my medications until I was 15, and then I stopped taking them around age 14, 15, and when I came out as trans, I was on no medications, which was definitely a problem that should have been addressed before anything else was done, except it wasn't. I wasn't put on any medications. I wasn't put on a pill for depression. I wasn't put on anything for anxiety. I had no medication. I didn't want medication. All I wanted was the testosterone because I thought this is going to solve all my problems.
The whole attitude of what's called affirmation instead of neutrality and inquiry caused considerable damage to the capacity of the service and clinicians to take on the full complexities of the cases they were dealing with. As a result, children have been very seriously damaged.
I masked a lot of what I was really feeling, and I used being trans as a way to deal with all of the things that I was feeling. Looking back, hindsight is 2020. Of course, I wish someone would have said to me, stop. Which, of course, I was a child, and I could have, things could have ended up differently if, but there's no point in saying, what if? I was also very obsessed, I was obsessive. And I feel like there were many red flags.
There were all these red flags, and I honestly wish that somebody had pointed them out to me, and then I might not have transitioned in the first place. If I had realized that, somebody with a history of an eating disorder, a history of childhood sexual abuse, a history of, neglect and bullying for being a gender non-conforming female, a person with internalized homophobia and misogyny should not have been encouraged to transition, as if these things could be solved by becoming a man. And I wish that somebody had sort of tried to stop me.
By putting on that pathway, it rather becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
After that, I was like, okay, maybe I'm non-binary. And then I thought more about it, and I obsessed over it for months. And I thought, you know what? I think I'm trans. I think that I'm a trans guy. And when I thought that, I physically felt a weight lift off my shoulders.
The children have been diagnosed now as their main problem being gender. The other problems are left aside. And this results, in my view, in many children having inappropriate medical treatment. Children of that age, say 10, 12, 13, 14, can they really, and given that they're very disturbed at the time, are they really in a position to to weigh up and understand what the implications for them are? What they want is something done now. I want to change now.
And I thought, oh my God, this is the answer to all of my problems. This is it. And that's what I told my therapist. That's what I told anyone who asked me. I came out to everyone immediately once I realized that I was a trans guy. I was like, everyone has to know right now about how good this feels, about how this is me. This is the real me. And once I had that seed planted in my head, there was no getting it out. There was no taking it back.
35 to 40% of these children are on the autistic spectrum. Large number of them have been exposed to major trauma. Large number have very serious family problems.
I was 16 when I started testosterone. And if I had been forced to wait, I thought that being trans was making me want to kill myself. But if I had been going to a good therapist, if I had been going to school, if I had had friends and had meaningful relationships with people outside of the internet, I know that I would have been able to reconcile my female identity with myself the way that I was. I was just living so disconnected from my body and so disconnected from who I really was.
Unfortunately, many of our professional organizations are advocating for this, including Endocrine Society. And it's important to bear in mind that there's very small groups of people controlling these societies. Small groups of people are making these pronouncements.
Not long after my report came out, the chief executive made a public statement in which he said that those who raise criticisms against the trust have an unfortunate attitude to gender. Now, I don't know what unfortunate attitude to gender means, but I think this is like a message to everyone else who doesn't have my seniority and my safety, really. Oh my God, I better not speak out because they'll think I'm transphobic. Leaders of movements with a very powerful ideological commitment have managed to capture policy, both medically, professionally, in the media, and in government.
And then when physicians want to turn to what's the best practice, they're finding these things. And there's no rigorous research done. There's no controlled studies. It's very poor research, but it's, I guess, politically correct to go down these roads by these organizations.
With no evidence base, it's a purely highly politicized movement, which has had these consequences. So all that I am saying, and many people are saying, is that they need to wait. There needs to be a thoughtful engagement with them, as opposed to motoring them through to treatment pathways which have irreversible consequences for their bodies. So we're talking about not doing harm.
Maybe this is just me, but I mean, of course, hindsight. Because back when I wanted to take hormones, I thought Planned Parenthood, oh my God, this is like a godsend. I don't have to go, because I didn't want to talk to a therapist. So I don't have to jump through any hoops. I don't have to do anything. I just walked in and got it. And yes, that's on me for not knowing what I wanted to do. But I also feel like if it wasn't just as easy as just walking in and signing a form for something that permanently changes your body for essentially the rest of your life in some aspects, I think, like, if it wouldn't have been so easy for me to just walk in, I don't think I probably would have transitioned, because I think the longer I would have thought about it and given it more time to think and given it more consideration, I think it may have played a part and may have influenced me transitioning at all. If it just wasn't so easy just to willy-nilly on impulse just go and decide to take hormones.
In the beginning of the gender service, when there was only about 50 people, 60 people coming, the majority desisted. That is, they gave up the idea. They came off the puberty blockers. Now 99.8% or 99% persist. And the judges suggested that one of the reasons, a major reason for this persistence, is that the prescription of the puberty blockers and the changed cultural context may act to reinforce this view of themselves. Whereas given time to think may open other possibilities.
Because I feel like by encouraging minors to say, like, I'm in the wrong body, we're starting with a harmful mentality that's not going to go anywhere good. By that point, I had already convinced myself that I was a man trapped in a woman's body, as it were. So I don't know if there's much I could have said that would have been like, hey, you're not actually trapped in your body. Your body is your own for a reason. You were born in that body. Here's what I would say. I'd be a little bit harsh. And this probably wouldn't get the point across to her. But I would say, you were born a woman, and you're going to die a woman. No matter how many hormones you take, no matter how many surgeries you have. That doesn't change who you are. I just think saying that you can be a man in a woman's body is just wrong. Like, why would you tell a minor that you can just change your body? By encouraging minors to say, like, I'm in the wrong body, we're starting with a harmful mentality that's not going to go anywhere good.
So what are some of the forces that are driving this, that are behind this, that are pushing this? Number one, you have psychology, unfortunately. Without the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 5th edition, you would not have professionals able to bill for transgender services, and that isn't even a diagnosis. Without that version, billing would not be possible. Then there are other forces in play. Here's a list very quickly. You have social engineers that are interested in social change. You have big foundations and big endowments with a lot of money. You have big banks, big pharma, big medical doctors and hospitals. You have plastic surgeons. You have transgender medical clinics and services. You have SOGI sex ed material. You have Planned Parenthood. You have human services and social services and foster care. You have sales and marketing of trans products and services. You have the media. You have TV, Hollywood, Nickelodeon, Disney, RuPaul, I Am Jazz, and 50 Shades of Grey fits in there too because of BDSM. Corporations, they're media sponsors, and they will also punish those that don't play ball. You have social media such as Tumblr, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, pimps and human traffickers, sexual predators and pedophiles, the porn industry, especially Pornhub, and politicians who receive huge campaign contributions for their votes for pushing the trans ideology, which is ultimately aimed at harming kids, transitioning them, getting them on puberty blockers, which will sterilize them and ultimately lead them towards being sliced and diced and amputated. When you start to really pull back the shades on this grand deception and the scheme, and when the predator apologists know that you're onto them, they'll kind of play the ultimate trump card, which is, well, you don't understand. It's not what it looks like. And that's a classic predator defense, by the way, to throw you off track and to still control the narrative. Well, fortunately, there's been a few folks that have been willing to step forward and step out at great risk to describe really what goes on behind the scenes. One of those, and I'm very appreciative for, is Kitty Demure, a legitimate drag queen. And what do I mean by legitimate? Because he's concerned about kids and keeping them safe from predators.
Hi, everybody. This is Kitty Demure, your friendly favorite conservative drag queen. Anyway, I have another message for heterosexual women, the ones who have children. I have no idea why you want drag queens to read books to your children. I have no idea. What in the hell has a drag queen ever done to make you have so much respect for them and admire them so much, other than put on makeup and jump on the floor and writhe around and do sexual things on stage? I have absolutely no idea why you would want that to influence your child. Would you want a stripper or a porn star to influence your child? It makes no sense at all. A drag queen performs in a nightclub for adults. There is a lot of filth that goes on, a lot of sexual stuff that goes on. And backstage, there's a lot of nudity, sex, and drugs. Okay? So I don't think that this is an avenue you would want your child to explore. To actually get them involved in drag is extremely, extremely irresponsible on your part. And I understand you might want to look like you're with it, that you're cool, that you're woke, that you're not a Nazi, that you're not a homophobe, whatever it may be. But you can raise your child to be just a normal, regular, everyday child without including them in gay, sexual things. Today I'm online and I look at another picture of another boy dressed in drag, and this time he's doing what they call a death drop. And he is like on the ground wearing a miniskirt, his legs are open, and a man is handing him a dollar bill. Now, I don't understand why parents think it's okay to dress their children up in this way and have them entertain and accept tips. These are things that happen in adult places. And why are they doing it in public? And they're just letting children do it. Why is that okay? Like, when did that okay? When did parents just stop caring? I don't get it. None of you, or anybody that I know of, would ever allow their daughter, a 9-year-old daughter, to put on a 2-piece bathing suit, get on the hood of a muscle car, dance and roll around, and accept money for men for doing that. Why are we okay with this? Why is everybody okay with it? Why isn't anybody doing anything? I don't get it. I've already called out RuPaul. I've called out the drag community to say something and to condemn this, but none of them are. In fact, I had a friend today, in fact, tell me it's just drag. It's no big deal. No, it is a big deal. It is a big deal when you take a little boy, you put makeup on him, you put him in provocative clothing, and have him dance around like a sexy woman and have men throw money at him. There is something wrong with that. I want to talk about something that really breaks my heart, and I think it's disgusting, is allowing children into the gay clubs to do drag. And I saw a picture the other day of a drag queen that I have worked with. Her name is Violet Chachki. She's actually won RuPaul's Drag Race. She was considered Drag Race's superstar for a year. She was recently photographed with a child somewhere, and she was naked, and she had tape over her genitals. That's what we call tucking in the drag world. And I don't understand why the drag world is not condemning this. In fact, I think RuPaul herself should be condemning this. I think the drag community and the gay community needs to do better, and they need to keep children out of these venues, and they need to keep them out of gay events. I did a video not that long ago about children at gay pride events. They don't belong there either. There's a lot of adult activity that is going on at the gay pride events and in the nightclubs. And I think it's just irresponsible. I don't understand how parents allow it. There is lots of drugs, alcohol, sex, nudity, you name it, in the gay nightclubs. They're all like that. Children should not be a part of this culture. So please do not support this. Condemn it. I would like to see drag royalty completely condemn this and discourage it, because this should not be going on. Children should not be subjected to that.
Well, in closing, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your interest in better learning how to protect kids. As both parents and churches and good people, we need to understand that this movement cannot be ignored. It is only gaining speed, and it intends to gain access to kids. And the kids it is targeting are the most vulnerable among us. And I appreciate your time. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Predator Watch, dedicated to shining the light of truth about the nature of the most sophisticated of sexual predators most likely to target places where victims are most easily accessed. For John Uhler and the entire team, thanks for listening.
Predator Watch has been sponsored by SurvivorSupport.net. As a non-profit organization, Survivor Support is dependent upon the generosity of people who believe in its mission of supporting survivors. Please consider becoming a monthly supporter of this important work.